At your command.
A base building is being damaged. Your base is under attack.
Give me orders. On station. Something is moving out there. Your 6. As you order. As you command. On station.
As you order. On station.
Oh, great. It fucked up again. Okay, do I want to go ahead and start?
Alright. Welcome everyone to Housing and Win and Cepheus Protocols weekly recap. With us we got Robert and
Hello.
myself. And we will just be discussing the things that have been happening throughout the week. So let's begin with, every developer's favorite subject, bugs. Let's let's just clear the table with that one first. What bugs have happened lately through just this week alone? Well, with the game and its development.
Well, the biggest thing was basically resolving a lot of, like, I guess civilians are being thrown into buildings, so they're being evacuated sometimes. So we had some of our level designers go back and take a double check at some of the buildings because they were basically, how it kind of works is when a civilian is ejected from a building, it lerps them out, and sometimes it does ignore collision, so it can get the entirety of the group outside of the building. Because the building has collision and they have collision. So the idea is that it gets them outside the structure, lerps them, and then it also turns on their collision. And I guess in some cases, it was actually just throwing people into like a fence, a concrete barrier in grid 1. Other than that, though, a majority of our time has really been spent on just kind of hunting down. Well, it was more so hunting down performance issues. It wasn't as much as bugs. It was more just so the performance issues that were highlighted by some people in the community and in some recent Discord posts, and then on Steam. So we've been trying to hunt those down, look at save files, and kind of figure out what's causing it. And we haven't nailed down the 3 aspects of the game. And now we're just trying to optimize them even further. I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that.
You can elaborate if you wish, yeah.
So basically, in the engine, there are 3 systems that are currently like causing all the performance issues. Movement, which is the movement component. It's the AI, which is the perception system, hearing and seeing. And then it's the skeletal mesh. Oh, sorry, and there's technically a fourth one, timers. So we've been going through and we've essentially been optimizing those four elements to try and space out calls per se, in terms of like, oh, like previously we were doing too much on one tick, or we were calling too many timers on one moment, and then that would cause your CPU to kind of like, oh my god, what do I do? Like it wants you to update the status of these civilians, but then it also wants you to update what's going on with these buildings and what Chelsea's doing. So basically what we had to do is we had to space it out more by milliseconds instead of like give it more ranges instead of absolute like times the timers need to execute. So like when a building updates its status in the world, it's more of a range of like 2 to 3 seconds. So then that way it doesn't all hit the CPU at the same time, and that lowers the cost of the timer handle. So we've been going through, we've just been kind of looking at systems like that. So like, I'll give you an example. We got a couple of save files over the weekend on Friday-ish, and we would load up the save file, do some profiling, look at the bar graphs in terms of basically what systems are taking up the most resources. And then we just kind of figure out like, okay, these systems, they're going way over the top, they're eating too many frames, and we would just kind of attack it based off of whichever one's the biggest beast. Right now, the remaining one, which we did quite a few performance changes over the night, because Derek's been working on that all morning, is basically threading some distance checks for the civilians. So then that way, we're not relying on the perception system for like sometimes when you see civilians, they appear based off of hearing and seeing of like proxy actors. We got rid of that proxy system because that was overloading the perception system because there was just too many actors to keep an index of. So we went in more of like a 2D distance checks where basically we just thread a distance check and then we're like, hey, how close is your unit to these capsules that represent civilians walking on a street? And if they're within sight range of the unit, then it turns them on, and then it basically turns on a proxy that kind of fakes their hearing and seeing, so that way one civilian sees for 6 civilians. And that's generally the idea that we've had to go into to basically make sure the games perform it. But most likely long term, we're gonna have to write our own custom perception system for hearing and seeing, because the current system it's really made for a first person shooter. So it's really over the top when it comes to like hearing and like there's a lot of extra overhead that we're running into that we're noticing. So our options are to optimize that system, re-rake it, or make a new system. So we're kind of like putting a band-aid on it. We're trying to basically triage it for the next couple of weeks so we can finish 1.2. And then sometime in 1.3, we're going to basically rip the perception system out, because regardless, it's going to have to be rewritten or greatly replaced with a new system before we add like the factions and the other people on the main map. Because how it works is that everyone pulls from the perception system in terms of cost. That's why we were so hesitant about increasing the pop count even during the custom game settings, because every unit that you add is another unit that's doing constant traces every millisecond to make sure he can hear and see. So once you go above 80, it can balloon out of control based off multiplied by the civilians, the infected, and the circ. Where sometimes it can be doing queries after 100,000 checks every millisecond, which is why sometimes like when you get some really heavy combat, the system kind of buckles at times, and then it'll recover, and then it'll buckle, and then it'll recover, because it's basically like, oh, some people died. I can garbage collect them. I'm not doing as many checks. And the other problem is the current system does a round robin approach, where basically, okay, you get some resources, you get some resources, oh, you get some resources, but then sometimes it'll neglect clusters of infected or circ or civilians to where their perception isn't amazing. It's not perfect. So that's another thing that we're looking at, where we're like, okay, like how can we increase these edge cases where it's like they're not being as performant as they should be, and that we need to essentially like kind of make them as realistic as possible in terms of hearing and seeing, but not blow up people's computers. And part of that was threading. So we threaded some aspects of the game last night. We're going to thread more aspects going into the weekend, going into next week. and then we'll put out a test after we finish here. I'll put out a build on experimental, and then that will have some more of like the optimizations in the chain. So Circ will gain a little bit more perception. They'll be a little more responsive. You'll get a better frame rate, probably about 5 to 10 frames. And then on Monday we'll hit it again, look at the same files, and keep pushing it until we're not compromising on just their abilities to hear and see, and everyone's just kind of on even footing in terms of being able to fight and play. So that's in a nutshell really what we've been focusing on, because that kind of like derailed finishing at 1.2, because it kind of like when we added in the ambient civilian splines, they overloaded the perception system. So we're trying to work backwards to kind of like fix that, and then essentially move on to the rioting and the martial law stuff and the dynamic civilian groups during their uprising stuff. Anyway, back to you, Darmar.
So it certainly sounds like you guys have definitely got your hands full with with everything that's going on.
Yeah.
So in terms of showing off anything that you guys have done through the week, is there anything you'd like to show off?
Let me think. There's really nothing to show in the editor right now unless they want, because I don't know how fun they would see profiling data. So like you figure most of it. Oh, I can show off the operator actually. Hold on. That was something that Michael has been working on. I can show that off in a test map. So give me a sec and I'll load up that, and I can show off the new camera and some of the stuff that we're working on. For like some cats are working, they're ahead and they're working backwards because like the animator can't do anything while we're fixing all these programming issues. The character modelers and the like level designers can't do anything. So the ideas are already kind of going ahead and working on like 1.3 stuff. They're ratcheting up like some of the textures. They're basically adding in like we added in the helicopter destruction. So then now like essentially when you blow something up, it will like actually have physics for the helicopters and whatnot. So they're kind of doing stuff like that and like kind of working in between things that they don't need a programmer for. They necessarily don't really add that much cost to the game, and they just kind of make the quality of the game look better in terms of its presentation. So here, let's see if I can switch over real fast and just show you guys. Yes, so I mean they're essentially working on a majority of like the 1.3 stuff in terms of like cleaning up the operator camera, working on the maps, smaller pandemic maps that basically people could play, to basically just kind of get a feel for like where the game, like give it some more replayability. Let me go ahead and see if I can. Hopefully this doesn't break. How do I? Hold on one sec. Let me share my screen. Did they break that? Huh. Oh wait, there it is. I'm slow. Okay, so it's right here. So here's some of the stuff that we've been doing with the operator in terms of basically improving its player camera. Because one of the big things that we want to do going into co-op is we want to make it more like the Division in terms of like you can have a bunch of operators that are running around in co-op as you're running the army from an RTS standpoint. So it was important for us to like okay like let's go back and let's look at the operator and let's figure out what's lacking about him. And a big part of that was like from the foundation it was the camera. So we let me see. Oh, I think it's an anti-cheat hook. Give me one. There we go. I had to change it to Windows 10 render capturing. So basically, we've been kind of going through, we've kind of cleaning up the operator camera to essentially make it to where like they're a little more responsive in terms of like aiming and shooting. And then at this point, we're gonna probably have some rules in terms of like when you shoot someone in third person, it will cause hit reactions or stuns. So that way your impacts feel like, they're actually impactful in terms of hitting people. And then part of the actual change of like when we get caught up in the early parts of 1.3, then we'll put in the newer UI. That's more of a modern third-person UI. We'll add in better controls so you can control your army from the actual operator. So then it's like, oh, I want to play like Freedom, because I'm a big guy on Freedom Fighters and Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter. I love RTS games, but I've always wanted to have like a really good hybrid between the two. So for me, I want to make it to where like you can recruit units and you can basically like drive vehicles in the operator for when you're basically like in that mode. And then if you switch back to RTS, obviously you have more utility, things are quicker, you can zip around the map, but in the operator you can still do things like requisition new units, buy new weapons for yourself. I'm not really sure about the customizing of weapons for your team. I have to kind of figure that out. But this is like one of our little test maps, so we've been kind of working on that. I think he fixed the crouch to a certain degree for relax. I don't, it looks like aiming is working. So, that's something that's been working on. This is actually in the latest experimental in terms of basically like seeing it. And that's one of the things that Michael's been kind of working backwards on. Other than that, he's been kind of going back and trying to fix the clipping. You can see right now there's some like some vest issues going on with like around her chest area. That was a bug when we updated to 5.2, when it added a bunch of dummy bone animations. So we have to go back and re-import those animations as people spot them or respot them. So that's been fun. But it was some kind of weird bug where we updated to 5.1 to 5.2, and then the engine was like, haha, I got you! And basically decided to add that like rubber banding. So if I put it in unlit mode, you can probably see it better. Yeah, the jiggling of the vest. And then you figure, so like that's something where like it happens right now, and then as we're seeing it when we play the build, or as people report it to us, then we hunt it down and we fix it. That's something we've been working on. Let's see, and then if I jump out, we've been working on a DNA research tree. This is like an early mock-up. This is what I did. I've been doing this. I did this a couple weeks ago. Basically, it's like an early block out of a DNA research tree. This is not coming out to 1.3, but it's just kind of done from a back-end standpoint. Where the idea is that when everything's said and done, this will allow you to use DNA points to upgrade your filter for the gas mask. It'll allow you to upgrade your infection rate. So then that way, like, essentially, like, how quickly this virus spreads in your units is reduced. It will allow you to upgrade your infection resistance, so when you get meleeed, there's less of a chance for you to get infected. There's a DNA drop boost, so that it'll increase the amount of DNA that drops by a unit by, like, I think it was like 10, 20, and then 30%. And then there was an spitter acid time reduction, where basically when units spit acid on your units, it'll reduce the time that basically it burns, or it does a dot damage over time by about 2 seconds when it's fully maxed out. So your units will have a little bit more resistance towards spitters. And then the last thing that we're going to be doing, well, let me not say last thing, is one of the top things that's still implemented right now is the LT DNA. Where the idea is that the LTs are going to be more like heroes that you have to hunt down and kill, and they'll be guarded by conclaves of infected. So you'll have like lieutenant icons somewhere on the map where you zoom out, kind of like Warlords of New York and The Division too. And you'll have to basically prioritize, like, okay, I can't kill Chelsea until I collect these 3 different types of strains of DNA, research them, and then do the shredder rounds. So that way it'll be more of a logical leap of like you gotta like collect the lieutenant's DNA, they'll respawn, so that way sometimes if something goes wrong, or if they die, or they get glitched out of the map, she can rebuild them. This will be coming roughly around the time that we add the aircraft carrier change, where the idea is that you'll have an aircraft carrier that you can essentially like move and build, and that's your hero unit. And then Winters will be rebuildable, and her lieutenants are rebuildable, like Age of Empires heroes, or like Colonel Burton from 0 Hour. So that's generally the direction we're going. And again, this UI is like super dirty. Well, a UI artist had a wedding, so he's been out for about 2 months. So when he should be back in the next week or two, and then when he gets back, he's going to be going over the UI elements that need to be basically like freshened up. Right now, our UI is pretty much crap. We already know that. We're just kind of biding time until we can get to the point where we can just tear out the whole thing and just skin the new one. You can see an example of that on our roadmap of exactly how it's going to look. It's a lot better. Like the mini map is transparent. Like everything just kind of flows better. There's an actual button for like cycling unit abilities. So if you have like heavies and assaults selected, kind of like in World in Conflict, you can cycle the abilities and switch between the heavy abilities and the assault abilities without having to like select and deselect. You just press like a little ticker on the left and right, and then it'll just change selections. There'll be a build order queue. There will be switching between different types of buildings. So buildings will be categorized, and there'll be like a little like building icon. So you can click on that, and that will switch you to all your barracks, all your civic administration zones, all your central tet. If you forgot where that is, you click on that icon, it'll jump you to that location. So there's a lot of quality of life changes coming in 1.3. One of the first things on the list actually is just kind of like ratchet up some aspects of gameplay. Um, yeah. And then for the question in the YouTube, that's not till 1.3, and the end of 1.3. So our goal is to use 1.3 to get the game ready for co-op. Finish the UI, get the operator in there, get him so he's ready to be tested and skip mass. Because again, if I have my way and the game works and everything's performance, you're going to have at least 12 operators in a session. And then they'll just take up quite a bit of pop. And then the rest of the pop will go towards whatever the RTS players are doing. So theoretically, you could play with more of your friends that like to play third-person shooters. And then for me and Michael are going to be sitting down with Derek sometime around 1.3 when we do the operator retrofit, and we'll be adding skill points and skill tree allocation. So then that way, at that point, you can actually spec operators in different playstyles. You can change their loadouts like in Call of Duty or Battlefield. And the idea is that they're useful in RTS, but they're also useful in third person when you possess them directly. Because I want them to be like RTS heroes, your own custom make it heroes, like Lord of the Rings, Battle for Middle Earth 2, or Rise of the Witch King. Those classics, because I love those games. So that's the general idea that we're going in. And then the idea would be is you can customize and change out all of her abilities. So these 4 slots can be changed out with like, okay, you want a healing ability, you want a fire down ability, and you don't want grenade. Maybe you want flashbangs. So part of the changes that we'll be doing is changing some of our more rigid design structure and how we do applying units to abilities to units and implementing gas. And gas is basically gameplay action oriented like something. Basically, it's what Remnant 1 and 2 uses. A new one's coming out. A lot of Unreal Engine games use it, where it's like a gameplay ability system built into the engine that Fortnite uses, and that it's kind of like reached maturity. There's enough documentation for it to where like one of the last things we're gonna do before we like release co-op is convert over all the abilities, the running, the health, everything to gas, so it's replicated by default and it already scales. So that's one of the things that we're gonna be doing to get the game ready for co-op. So yeah, what else? Anything else you think I should show? Source development kit. Basically, it's the program that we use to develop the game and make maps and just push content updates from. So eventually, when we get to modding, when this SDK is better organized because it's a monstrosity right now, then this will be kind of like a light version of it. People would use to kind of make their own maps. So that way, if they want to add or if they don't agree with our weapon balancing, they could go in and they can change it to whatever their heart's content is, or add in I don't know, change the spitter to a Velociraptor or Barney chasing after you, whatever they want to do. What you think, Dave? I'm sorry. I'll show San Francisco North, so people can get a reminder of just kind of like what we're working on there and how big it is. Because this is still a good couple of months out. You figure it's kind of backlogged at this point, and we're basically just kind of like trying to get more hands on it so we can finish it. Again, it's one of the biggest land masses that we have. It's like 2 to 3 times the size of the entire game right now. So when it loads, I'll show you guys. It's loading right now. So let me switch back over to. Well, actually, no, I'll just wait. It should already take that much longer. So, Derv, I don't know any other questions? Well, loads. Sure. It's going to be interesting how the balance comes out. Because you figure Chelsea has their lieutenants, you're going to have up to three-ish is what we're thinking right now in single player. Three-ish is what we're thinking. We might allow more. And they're going to be like fully customizable, persistent heroes. So you can bring them in and out in play sessions. So, because that's why the operator, when you go to there's an actual ribbon now where you can track and view the health and status of all your operators. And then you can have different loadouts and whatnot. So, it's gonna be interesting because you figure we want to put it in there because I like we want to see how it all kind of comes together, and then regardless, I don't think it's gonna be that much of a problem because we're gonna have potentially a couple weeks where we work on just improving the infected AI so they're not as moronic because they make a lot of stupid decisions right now, where it's like if they actually like knew how to use their numbers to their advantage, you would die a lot because you figure they would know, oh wait, we should probably stop sending cannon fodder to this defensive line, build up 3 juggernauts, send a Leviathan down the back, go build up like 40 to 50 standard infected, use spitters to start like picking them off. You have the juggernauts throw rocks, and actually have some amount of strategy instead of just throwing themselves at your defenses. So when that comes into play, theoretically it'll make the game even more sweaty. Because at that point, it's like, okay, I got to use my snipers to focus the juggernauts. I got to use the air units to kind of pick off the units that are coming in from the back out of their range. You could theoretically put snipers or like heavies on the little birds, keep them out of the range of the spitters, or use them to kind of pick them off under the cover of like guard towers or whatever. So the idea is that there will be more strategy required going into 1.3 because the game's going to get a lot harder. And the Leviathans are going to get a lot more intelligent, the Juggernauts. So I don't really foresee it being a problem. They're going to need the operators, if you think about it. They're going to need to like make some custom operators that kind of fit kits. Where like it's like this operator team in RTS is like your covert, like sniper team. And that operator group is like your frontline assault team. They're the crack squad. They're the best of the best. And they cost a lot of money to come in. And they take it as a recovery time in terms of when they die, because right now that's been historically free. But the idea is that that is like your saving grace team that you can bring in the beginning of the game if you're willing to sacrifice some money on not building assaults and building them instead. And you can kind of make like squad cohesions with it is the idea. More control than you're gonna have with the assaults and the heavies and the snipers, because now these units have abilities that you've handpicked and made it to where that guy's a hybrid medic. And this guy's like a hybrid heavy, assault heavy, kind of deal. So that's generally the direction we're kind of going in. And then the AI will just have to improve in terms of their intelligence to kind of adapt towards like them being more deadly, the circuit being more deadly. And then obviously when it comes to the Abrams, the VTOL, and the Bradley that we're planning on, those have already kind of answered the question, put off to the side. We have the models for them. It just comes down to resources and time. Because when we add those to the game, we want to have the AI in a better place, and we want to have the what do you call that? The bloody realistically the AI in a better place, and we need to do the weapon packages, so like the Little Bird for the Black Hawk, so you actually have weapons that you can arm on them. So we're kind of trying to like bundle all of that together at the same time in 1.3, and we're just calling it like a doctrine revamp or a doctrine update. Because like for instance, the 30% discount for like building engineer stuff, that's gonna be like increasing the cost. That's gonna be moved down. We're gonna look at all the cheap tactics people have done to cheese the game and rebalance the doctrine tree. Like those damn mortars are getting a nerf. In terms of basically, they're gonna cost population, they're gonna have ammo, So you're actually going to have to like have a logistical line in terms of basically like replenishing these, like the turrets, where essentially they cost a lot of money to maintain and fire. So you're not going to just be able to build 20 mortars and GG win the game. But those are basically things that we're looking at in terms of like how people play the game and figuring out like, okay, where are things a little bit unfair? You know, when a player is abusing, and then be reactive in terms of like, okay, like there should be some over-the-top weapons and fun. That's why people like, you know, Zero Hour, or they like, you know, like Command and Conquer, Full Cage Wrath. I mean, all those little crazy over-the-top units, but to a certain degree, we have to keep some semblance of balance, so that way the infected aren't just steamrolled by just building 10, 20 mortars and then you just win every time. And then one of the changes that we'll do for the mortar going into 1.3 is that we're going to make it to where they auto-fire like a Company of Heroes. So we'll give them an AI that essentially can target and look around and kind of figure out like, oh, there's a concentration here, I'm going to stop firing at these units, and then you'll be able to toggle automatic fire or not. So by default, when you build a mortar, they'll fire automatically if you have line of sight. And if you don't, then you'll have to fire them manually by telling them to attack a location or using an ability if you know something the game doesn't know. Like you know people are coming through the fog of war at this location. Tell it to attack ground and watch the bodies fly. So that's generally the idea the mortars are going to go into, is one of the changes that we're going to be doing in 1.3 is just kind of get rid of that like extra micro that makes the game kind of frustrating at times. Because that's one thing that we've heard a lot, is that the game is very, very like baby city, very micro intensive at times, and it makes the game not fun. So it's about basically still having like those aspects of like logistics for like ammo and gas, but not making it so invasive that it becomes cumbersome to like your experience of having fun. Custom game settings. I mean, yeah, we'd have to look at the community poll. So there was, I forget his name, my apologies, but there was a person in our community that made a poll that basically has a list of custom game options that they would like us to add to the game. So that would be one of the things that we'd have to do before we go off and do co-op. Because the idea would be is we want people to share those, and we want them to essentially make like insanity runs, like only standard infected, no juggernauts, they can only walk, like the original Resident Evil. And just that's how you want to have fun today. That's how you want to have fun today. Do your role play. Play the game how you want to play it. I mean, we'll always have our preferred settings in director's cut and in easy mode, but we want to kind of go back and change like and expose mutilators that typically mods would do, and kind of give people early ways of kind of catering the game to how they want to play. So if they want to turn off the spinners, they can. They want to turn off the blow-up guys or the juggernauts, they can. They want to change their health, they want to change their speed, they want to change their frequency of jumping, how much damage they do when they explode. We kind of want to expose those to the custom game settings. And then that kind of goes into the next topic we're doing in 1.3, where we're going to go back and we're going to revamp the saving and loading. Because right now, the saving and loading in the game is just atrocious. In terms of, like, it takes too long to query save games. And on top of that, like, there's not much data to go off of. Like, you look at the save game and you're like, what was I even doing here? Like, I have the date to go off of. I have the map I was on. But really, there's not really descriptive. So the idea is we want to take the custom game settings and apply those as tags to the save file. And then change it from slots to names. So you can specify names for a save file. And that's one of the things that we're going to do that when we do the UI change. Because it makes no sense to put it off longer. So when you hear us announce working on the UI stuff, that's where we're going to be going in, and we're going to be changing it so that way it's like, oh, like the save system is a little bit more like, it's not as rigid. It's easy to work with. It's easier to clear out saves. It doesn't take a dynasty to just new game, load game, and then you sit there and you're like, okay, when's my save file is going to pop up? Can I like get some kind of pictures associated with these, or like that kind of stuff? Because it's just kind of lacking. One thing that I do want to add, just to kind of let you guys know, and I'll probably bring this up a couple of times going into 1.3 so there's no surprises, is that I'm a fan of Red Dragon in some of those games and how they do their targeting. So one thing that I want to do from the wargaming franchise is I want to add it to where when you select a unit and you highlight an enemy unit, it will draw a line and then it'll put a crosshair and it will tell you if your unit can't fire from its current position, where they would need to go to fire, and if they're currently firing at another target. So kind of like that system where like you can see weapon ranges dynamically. Because right now it's kind of hard to know when is your assault gonna start firing, when is your guard tower gonna shoot, when is your Apache gonna be able to shoot its missiles. So the idea is that like it would be like a visualization of kind of like in the Red Dragon Wargaming franchise, where it would be like, hey, I'm gonna draw like a line, I'm gonna draw a little crosshair, and I'm gonna show you if you can't attack an infected, where your attack line stops, so that way you know to move closer. And then obviously we're planning on adding queuing. We're gonna add queuing of buildings and queuing of move orders, and then you're gonna see a huge change in 1.3 in terms of like actual having like unit cards. So we're gonna have like unit descriptions, health status, like what's currently affecting a unit. So right here where it says Twin Peaks, we're gonna likely cut down the size of this, and we're gonna have to figure out something with our UI artists to essentially have some kind of like unit card where it shows their health, their armor, what's affecting them, their description, because everything needs a health bar. And like the Juggernaut and like the other people, they've kind of had like we put in one recently to kind of help people understand how much they're hurting the Juggernaut. But it's been one of those things where it was just kind of like, okay, like we need to do better and just we need to kind of not cut that corner that other RTS games have kind of established as like a norm, is you need detail panels. So that's one of the big things that we're going to be working on going into 1.3 for the UI is adding detail, health bars, panels, just to kind of like flesh that out a little bit. I don't know if you want to regroup back to the end of 1.2, Derivar, at this point, or what we're doing. Where do you want to go from here then? Yes. Well, it's going to be really goddamn interesting because at that point we're going to have a mini division. Because if you think about it, you're going to have an entire city that just kind of run around. That's in San Francisco, of course, but I mean, you can see right now the sheer size of it. Where it's going to take me, I guess, 10 minutes probably from where I started to get to the other part of the city. So it's going to make using helicopters and using vehicles even more important. Because again, this map is like 2 to 3 times the size of the current one. So the biggest growing pains that we're going to run into is after we stem the bleeding and figure out like the optimizations for perception, we're going to have to double down even more virtualization or like simulating things that aren't immediately around the realm of influence for Cirque and figuring out how to stretch the Unreal Engine to its very limitation, it's like to its ends, like because like by the time this game is said and done, we're gonna be pushing the Unreal Engine to its limits. We're already starting to push the Unreal Engine to its limits in a lot of regards, or we're going to have to start engineering custom solutions and bringing on specialists to basically kind of fill in some aspects of gameplay, like the pathfinding for a map this large. That would basically be a little bit more like in a tune than like what we have. Because like you can see right here, this is like our dynamic formation mover as an example, where like you guys don't see this when you're playing the build, but there's like a commander that tells your unit stay in this position and always like try and like stay a certain offset from your where your assigned position is. But even then, sometimes they fail and they kind of fall behind. So we have to figure out about giving them temporary move boosts so they can kind of stay on their eagle but not stop moving constantly. So it's like stuff like that where it's like, okay, like we need to kind of like ratchet things up and figure out what the priorities should be. Because in a game like this, there's always so many goddamn moving parts. You know, there's so many things that are going on at any given time. So it's like, okay, like, we gotta get this perception stuff figured out. Then we gotta really ratchet up and finish 1.2 for the non-lethals, for the rioting, for the ambient civilians. Figure out what all we're going to put in for the dynamic civilian groups, because there's like probably a day or two of bug fixes that need to be just applied to them in their own. Make a promotional trailer to showcase 1.2 finishing. And then at that point is when we would officially enter 1.3. Oh, I missed one. Automation. Civilian automation is basically intake, because like eventually like that's gonna like we have to get that back online. Where the idea that you can just see like let's say for instance a civilian running nearby, if you're docking in that zone as intake civilians, they'll just automatically see your units or hear them and be like, oh, like they're currently evacuating in this zone. I need to go to an intake center. So then they go to the intake center, which is a civic administration structure, and then they're like, oh, hey, I'm here. What do I do? And then that system would determine based off of the best information available. Because this DNA research tree is missing a couple of things that we have to add in last minute, which is going to be unlocking the DNA scanners, DNA towers, and curing the infection. So based off of can they determine if you're infected or not at the intake center, they would use ROE or rules that you've dictated in that zone of kill everyone in the euthanization tents, shoot them on sight, put them inside the holding cages, because then the holding cages are going to become a way station for going to the helipad. So what will happen is individual civilians or group civilians will be intaked, and if they're deemed to not be a threat based off of your ROE settings, they'll be moved to holding stations, like the structure we've had, the little housing structure. They'll stay there until a helipad calls for them to be evacuated, and then they'll move to the helipad. So then at that point, you can kind of contain the people that are in your euthanization camps, you can contain the people that are waiting for the helipads, and you can contain the people, well, obviously you're containing the people that are in cages. So that way it gives you three distinctive ways to kind of corral and like lead people in terms of like how you want to play the game ethically or non-ethically. And then based off of that, the game will just kind of adjust based off of you're being a dick. You know, then eventually civilians will start to like riot more, and they'll start to oppose you instead of like one of the last things that we're going to squeeze in for 1.2 once we get this perception stuff under wraps is essentially making it to where if you're constantly a dick and you're constantly declaring martial law to slow the infection in a right, you'll start to get people that kind of riot and picket and yell at you obscenities, and then that will translate over to a couple minutes later to open rebellion, where they'll form a dynamic civilian group in that zone, or if there's already one in that zone, even if they were allies with you previously, they'll just immediately switch over to the alliance of like, you're abusing people in this zone, you're not taking care of them, you're not you're not fixing the problem. So now you're an enemy. So at that point, you have to kill everyone in that dynamic civilian group or cede the location by leaving it, and then they won't follow you. And they'll leave you alone if you leave them alone if you don't come back to that zone. So it's like one of those systems that we're kind of like working on behind the scenes to essentially just kind of like ratchet up and kind of add more like, you know, like this thing with consequences to your actions and how you're playing the game. And then we also have like a bunch of dialogue being recorded for like when you like let's say for instance I tell this structure right here I want to euthanize everyone, it'll start playing sick propaganda at loudspeakers that are pre-placed around the zone. You know, let's say for instance you're condemning a structure, it'll start playing sick propaganda about like why they're condemning structures and that you need to like find another area to reside, and if you need help, you know, please locate your closest circuit officer. And then if you're doing evacuations, then it'll do that in the zone, but it'll also do it at the evacuation. Like, so you won't have to do that like immersion breaking thing where you have to build like radio speakers, and then you have to get like a mod that like has that for atmosphere. You know, so like essentially that's one of the things that we've been kind of waiting for until we're like at the end of 1.2 when everything's said and done and finalized, is kind of doing those audio passes, so that way we can kind of improve the immersion of like, okay, like Cirque is actually like, what they're, you know, basically there's an actual like based off of your actions in the zone, it's essentially, you know, like having audio play in the zone, kind of like the nuclear alerts like during the Cold War of like like the sounds you'd hear in cities, it'd be like an emergency broadcast system in San Francisco that just kind of plays at different city blocks. So you could hear it no matter where you are in the zone, and it would basically like echo your doctrine in that zone. Um, so that's one of the things that we've kind of gotten the script written, we've gotten the scripts written, we've gotten the billboards like written out. Now we just gotta get the billboards modeled, textured, we've gotta send the UI out, and basically get that situated. Hopefully we don't have any issues of getting VO recorded with all the fun stuff going on with voice actors, but I don't think we have any of that. We don't really, I don't, because we're indie, I don't think that's only movies. Because they're doing that whole strike right now. That's going to be pretty interesting if we get any, like, oh, we're not doing anything right now. So, we'll have to wait and see when we send it over to the voice actors in the next week or so if there's any issues with that. But I don't think there will be, because it's only for movies that they're protesting. And then what else is there? I mean, then you can see we're actually having some interiors where you can just kind of go through the structures. And then these will see, like, finalization when we essentially kind of have, like, when we haven't playable. Because one of the things is theoretically this map is playable. We could put the infection system in here and we could make it playable right now in probably a matter of like a couple of days. But it kind of comes down to like we're kind of waiting until more of like the final buildings are placed in there. Because the collision's all accurate. There's also the concern of basically just adding in that much to the big map before we've optimized perception. So it's kind of like one of those maps that we're just kind of holding in the reserve until we've kind of ironed out a lot of issues. Depending on just how things go, this map might end up being a separate pandemic map if we can't make it work for all people's computers. Like if it just blows up when we add it all together. The last time we did a test where we added like all the maps together was about like 8 months ago, and it was decent. It worked for the most part. So like we need to do more tests. We need to do more benchmarking. We need to figure out can people's computers actually load all of this plus Treasure Island plus Angel Island plus the Golden Gate Oakland Bay Bridge that we're going to be adding here. Because Treasure Island's going to be right here, and then Angel will be over here, and then Alcatraz will be somewhere over here, and then Western Treasure Island will most likely be merged or augmented to basically make like a new fictional island somewhere else, so we don't like screw up the landscape or like the general like look of San Francisco. So that's going to be interesting because we might end up taking Western Presidio and turning it into a coastal town that they have in real life by Angel Island to the north and make it like a small little cutout of like our own fictional version of that space in real life. So like here, I'll show you guys. So what I'm talking about, if I open up maps, let me switch it over to Google Chrome, is that if I go over here, this area over here, that basically like this is Angel Island right here. This is Treasure Island. We have up to this section here for San Francisco North. So it could be that we end up adding a section over here, or we basically like refurbish or like recycle the assets that we have and add like a small little like mini island that's up north to Angel. But it's one of those things where we're just kind of trying to figure out what the best way is of just kind of like breaking it up. But it's just something that we're in early discussions for. We kind of see the map kind of like the Fortnite map, and we just kind of want to change it up and like refine it every couple of like years to kind of get the best possible version as we've kind of pushed the AI, as the naval stuff is implemented for the aircraft carrier, as like the AI improve, as more mechanics are changed, the map will have to change and be altered to kind of like fit everything that's going on, like the birds and Leviathan, like that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like a very much like a living, breathing map that we're just kind of adjusting. I'll have to post a picture, I guess, it didn't actually show it on Discord. Hold on, I'll post a picture on the stream. I forgot that it's not streaming on the bloody thing. So I'm talking about this area right here is it's very likely that we could end up recycling Western Treasure Island, that fake island that we added, to be an area like that up north called Skewer Tiburon. I can't even say the name correctly. So that's something that we were looking at doing in the past to kind of like clean up the map and make it look like the real world version, but still have interesting gameplay. Because once we added like proper AI, they should be able to get around properly and just kind of counter you and your tactics. Um, okay, what else do you have, Duravar, I guess? Yeah, and that's one of the things that we want to do as well. Is that we want to write a custom movement component, and we want to crowdsource more of the AI in terms of the hearing and seeing, so we can essentially have larger groups of infected, but not necessarily blow up people's computers. Because theoretically, we can take a lot of compromises with the standard infected in terms of basically how they move and how they can move around the world. They can like push against objects, and as long as we kind of are able to achieve like double or triple the amount of infected that we have right now, it's something that we might be willing to kind of compromise on. Where like they don't have the best pathfinding, but they're like where there used to be like 200 of them, now there's like 500 or 800. And that would be the standard infection, where they'd have like a little bit weaker perception, a little bit weaker um, hearing and seeing, but they would basically be in big groups. And you'd very rarely see them as individuals. But that could be a trade-off that we're kind of looking at long term. Because I know some people have said that in the past, where they do want us to kind of look into pushing the actual horde more, like pushing having larger hordes. So there's something that's on our mind, and the mob system for the civilians was kind of like our way of testing it. But aesthetically, it didn't come out that pleasing. So we went back to the drawing board, and we're trying to figure out like we think the best way of going about it at this point is just to when we get the co-op, see what it would entail to write a custom movement component, or the release after co-op is implemented, even with the current numbers that we have. Do that on the R&D side and the back end, and see what can be done. Because again, our team kind of sees this game as like a long-term endeavor. Whereas like kind of like Kenshi or like Stellaris or like Crusader Kings, no sequels, where the idea is that we're expecting to work on this for like 5 years, easy. In terms of like, okay, like let's see what else we can ratchet up, let's see what else we can improve. Let's get the base game to where there's so much you can do. It's like a sandbox. You load in, and it's the ultimate pandemic zombie virus simulator in terms of basically like you can cater it to your limbs, or you can just use our preordained playlist, like director's cut or whatever, in terms of how you want to play it. And then long term, we add in the mods, and then at that point, it's a whole new ball game at that point. Because then it's like, okay, like now people can make their own maps, and now there will be an overabundance of content for map stuff. So that's the general idea. But yeah, sure. Quarantine zone. So you're saying basically that would be the equivalent of doing the martial law. Because no one's allowed to move, and there's only rioters that are allowed on the street. So then at that point, it would come down to like, okay, like, what are you doing this for? Are you doing this to because there's already an insurgency, there's already a civilian group that hates your guts, and you're trying to limit civilian casualties for like 5 minutes so you can hunt them all down and kill them? Because at that point, like, friendly fire is still a thing for civilians, and maybe they're nested where a lot of civilians are. You're like, I want everyone to go inside for the next 2 minutes. It might hurt the happiness, but you're not going to die. So, like, that's one way that we're kind of seeing that system. And then, naturally it would be like, then the partial one as well. So that's kind of how we do, like, a lockdown or zone. We don't really have it right now where, like, they disobey it by fleeing into other zones because we didn't want to go that deep. We kept it to where like 10% will, roughly 10 to 20% will basically like protest your martial law or go out and picket, and then you'll have to use non-lethal weapons to force them back in. And every time you do that, it kind of slows down the tick to a certain degree, but eventually they're going to like rise up and basically try and kill you. which is kind of like why we snuck in. Like there's a gun right now, which is basically like a beanbag gun for secondary weapons, for secondary weapons for the assault. I don't think that many people have noticed it. It does like 5 damage to standard infected, but there's already like a beanbag gun in the game, and the idea is that like it affects their morale. So when you shoot them with the beanbag gun, and later the grenade launcher canister as a secondary, because we didn't want to add a third weapon, too much micro. So we added it to where basically like if you have people that are doing riot stuff, like the riot shield people, like the beanbag gun, like the grenade launcher gun that we're gonna add later on for a secondary, then they just disperse the morale and buy you time. If rioting is starting to become a problem, or you're just worried that some of them might get turned and then start killing your units on the front lines. So like that's one of the systems that we're just kind of looking to kind of like ratchet up, playtest, and get out there experimental ideally. Um, yeah, that answer your question?
Yep. Um, so turning to the infected now, moving a little further away from Cirque. Something I have been forever curious about is those walls that they have been able to deploy. When it comes to San Francisco, are we going to be able to see these just big giant meat walls?
So there was a system that was released in 5.2 that one of my artists is basically like very like keen on in terms of basically like figuring out if it would work for us. Is basically in the demo they had a procedural generation tool where they were able to generate vines and an entire like like an ancient like excavation site, whatever you'd want to call it, a temple, just by moving some assets around and typing in numbers. So with Nanite, we think that long term we can play with those procedural generation tools and play with Nanite and play with Niagara to kind of reintroduce fungal growth or infection growth in provinces. It's one of our long term goals that once we kind of ratchet things up and get the performance under control, we've always seen that as more of an aesthetic thing because it's not necessarily going to affect gameplay too much. So we implemented it like a year ago, and then we took it out because it was causing too many performance issues because the engine wasn't ready yet, and we didn't know how to optimize it properly. It was just too much for people's computers of like in terms of having like dynamic infected like Zerg growth everywhere. So that is something that we have a bunch of source assets for, and we're just kind of waiting until the tech gets there, waiting until it's the best time to kind of polish the aesthetics, which in my mind will either be right before. That one's kind of like a wish list item because it's not mission critical. It will most likely be sometime after co-op if I had to guess, because there's already so much that's snuck into 1.3, and that'd probably be 1.4, 1.5 at this point when we go back and redo Pierce and Natalie for the factions. Um, but yeah, like that's the general gist because the walls are also depending on if we can squeeze it into 1.3. I'm not really happy of how the walls work. The walls are kind of like temporary barriers, and the idea was that they would use them to kind of like obstruct certain movement. But we were supposed to also add traps, where like units could basically walk over it and get damage perceived to them if you weren't paying attention. Like certain like ones like spike traps, and then we were also supposed to add like mines, basically their equivalent of a mine. And then we were supposed to also push the idea of having the walls actually be walls, like instead of decay, where like when you play the Heartland, I think it's Heartland DLC, we played that for reference. They actually would use it to like build around Chelsea's main hive. They would use it to build around Lieutenant hives. That's one of the things that we need to like use the tools that we've made with the dynamic civilian groups for how their walls and how their perimeters function, and apply that to the infected. Because like we've kind of like we have like tidbits of systems here and there that we've kind of prototyped and tested, and some of them are better than the old systems that we've done, and we need to just kind of go back and just change out those systems and improve them. But because of the limited manpower, we're like, okay, like what's the priority? The priority is getting the civilian evacuation, the automation, and the rioting in. And then at that point, we got to look at those subsystems to be like, okay, like let's see if we can ratchet up those infected walls. Let's make it more strategic. Either they do it dynamically or they do it based off of prefabs that are pre-made by a level designer that basically are like common defense patterns that they might want for like setting up infected walls, like kind of cordoned off circ access. So that way you have to bring in flamethrowers, you have to bring in strikers to essentially clear an area so you can, advance. or in some cases it'll force you to use helicopters because they'll like you use your sandbags or your sandbags and your barbed wire or your double barbed wire. They would use the walls that validate and close off entire sections to where it becomes a nuisance for you to just kind of come through and clear. So that's like their way of basically like cordoning off a zone. So long term, that's what that's going to become is just random little walls that are placed down to kind of like make it to where you have to like maneuver a little bit. They'll be a lot more cumbersome in terms of like, oh, like I can't even get down the street anymore. I'm gonna have to bring a team to burn it. I'm gonna have to bring a team to defend them, or I'm gonna have to use helicopters and just basically bypass them altogether and hope if they don't have anti-air like spitters or whatever covering them. So yeah, that's the general idea for those.
Okay. Moving on to still on the subject of infected, is Greg and the Juggernaut.
Sure.
So, what obviously, the Juggernaut is definitely the much larger, tankish unit that throws boulders, walks like a monkey. But what are the further applications is he going to have for the infected?
Buffing.
You know,
He's
will
gonna be
he
a,
draw rally infected behind him or things like that.
that's the one of the things that we're gonna be experimenting with the AI change. It's not see the AI change is very vague. We have a lot of ideas to test because you figure so like the AI change will probably take a couple weeks if not a month on their own because that means lieutenants are gonna get better AI so they can actually dodge like when a striker shoots at them. They can jump around on buildings like they're more like Wesker or Jill Valentine when she's infected by that plaga thingy, or like can't think, or like Mercer for Chelsea. Chelsea's gonna basically mirror Mercer, where she's gonna be able to shred through your people and make like arms and claws and jump around and fly a little bit. So, like her jumping on the helicopter is just the start of your pain and suffering, and then that'll be better animated and better like tweaked, because she's just gonna be plowing through your men when you actually do decide to come to her. And she'll be made more like passive, so she won't like seek you out as aggressively, so it's not a big problem. But if she does decide to like the build where you are, you'll probably have to leave. Like we might look at basically having it to where like if you hurt her enough early game, she'll just give up and find a new location or set an offset from your current location. But we haven't had the time to do that yet. But it's something that we're looking at based off of feedback, where people will get rolled by Chelsea in the first 5 minutes, uninstall, leave a negative review, and never play the game again because they're not used to reverse cat and mouse. Where you're not the powerhouse here until 2 hours into the game. So it's one of those things where like we're looking at in terms of basically like making it not as bad early game, but it's just one of those things. Um, and then the other thing is like going back to what you were saying is like the Juggernaut, like you don't ever notice it, but when he roars, it's supposed to summon infected. When he beats his chest, kind of like the boomer when he spits and blows up on you. So like the idea is that like he was supposed to rally and call infected to him, and have an ability where he would summon infected or spawn infected behind him in a limited radius, and then they would basically like be his minions. Um, so like little systems like that have kind of gotten forgotten, or just kind of like haven't been broken, or haven't seen the day of light because we haven't given enough time and attention to basically just kind of flesh out in that card in its own, where it's like, okay, like the spinners, they need to act like velociraptors. They need to act like the Dilophosaurus, where like they play games. They don't just charge in. They're not suicide units. So like the raptors from Dead Space 2, for the Church of Unitology, where it's like they need to kind of be like stealth assassin units, where like they use bird calls. They fuck with you. They kind of play mind games. They're not all in just we're gonna charge in with 6 spinners and hope something happens. They can climb buildings. They can jump on your helicopters when they're too low to the ground, and then you just have to shoot them. So like those are ideas that we're looking at for the spinners. The blow up guy, he's pretty much gonna stay the same way he is. He's just a simple blow up guy. He dies and essentially he hurts your units. Like the blow up guy is probably the only infected AI that's not changing. And it's the Juggernaut, it's the Spinner, it's the Leviathan, and it's Lieutenants that are going to get a lot of the attention going into that card, and then generally just their tactics. So let's say, for instance, even No Man's Land, you've set up mines, you've set up barricades, you've set up machine guns. After a certain amount of time of them throwing bodies at your defensive line, they would mark that as, we should not go here anymore. Screw them, let's leave them alone, let's query other areas where we can spread the infection, and let's make you come to me. let's fortify our line and make it a no man's land on both sides. And then let's re-solidify our power base, build up some units, and then try and actually break the siege. Instead of just sending small quantities of units that are never going to break through because they're not properly analyzing your power level, what you're using, the effectiveness of like how far they're getting when they die, you know. So it'll be systems like that where it's like, oh, they failed like 2 or 3 times, they learn every time they fail. So the next time they're going to try something different. The next time they're going to try something different. And then that way it keeps you on your toes. So this time they sent in standard infected, that didn't work. They're going to wait. They'll build some juggernauts. That didn't work. Okay, we're going to do juggernauts, standard infected, and birds. Sent them to the back. That didn't work. Okay, now we're going to try leviathans added through the back as well. That didn't work. Okay, let's just keep doubling. And then that eventually doesn't work. They just stop altogether. And they're like, okay, we can't break through this line. We know they have to come and kill Chelsea. She's a hive mind. She knows that if you kill her, everyone just dies, like the Zerg celebrate from StarCraft. So then at that point, it's like, okay, like, I'm just going to fortify. You can fortify, I'll fortify, and we'll play a siege game and see, because she can wait all day. All she has to do is just kill and infect people and try and break in contagions or zones where you're not properly holding her. So she needs to play some more of her strength of, like, being a little bit more defensive when you're too entrenched and make you come to her, because you're going to have to for lieutenants, and you're going to have to for Chelsea long term to win the game. So yeah, that's generally the direction we're going into for the AI card. Back to you, Derivar.
Okay. So moving on to the Leviathan, big old Greg.
Sure.
So he's tunneling. Right. You stated a while ago that his tunnel is going to be an entryway for infected to get behind our lines. How is that going so far?
Not going at all. Because you figure it's set up right now, but they're not intelligent enough. Like you figure they build the tunnels, they fast travel along the tunnels to GLA, but it's like one of those systems where like they're not effective enough, and that's one of the things that we're going to be changing in the AI card, is looking at how their Leviathans are building around players, asking for save files the same way we did the perception system, and trying to figure out where they make stupid decisions. Because you figure sometimes they're great, sometimes they're terrible. And the same thing with the birds, where like sometimes they just do the perfect attack and they come up behind you and they start building nest, but typically they don't. There's not a good enough like central consciousness for them to like strategize enough. So it just happenstance at that point that they happen to make a decision call that was in perfect counter of your strategy in that moment, and we want to get rid of that and make it to where it's more of like they start flagging it. They send out birds to scout. They figure out where your guard towers are. They stay on the outer perimeter of them. They look for breaks in your defense. They sneak in. They cause an infection. They basically start building a nest instead of just rush the guard tower, die every time, and then maybe once they get lucky and they go around because they start from a new location. So the systems that we're going to be looking at, again, where we flag debug locations in the world and we save that data over save files. So that way they're like, oh, these guard towers have been deleted. They would do prerequisite checks of like, okay, like we went around with the birds, we backdoored the guard towers. Now there's an opening. And then that zone object would be like, okay, like, why was this object created? It was created because they had too many guard towers here and we couldn't get through. But now we check for those guard towers. Do they still exist every couple of minutes? And if they do, then we let them know the way is not clear. But let's say, for instance, someone backdoors you, like the civilians. Like, let's say the infected backdoor you via another party of the birds that got through when they circled you. Then they would know, oh, now we can send birds. Now we can send Leviathans because their repeaters are down. So that's the idea. Where they're more of like they communicate more together. So they're kind of like more intelligent. It's simulated intelligence because it's not real intelligence. It's just like, oh, it's just a bunch of prerequisites that are just being met, and now they're going to capitalize on that.
Ouch, burn. Not real intelligence.
It's not.
Good old Greg. Can't get wrong with him.
Everyone hates him. He just comes out of nowhere and ruins your parties, your dinner parties. He just kind of comes out of nowhere with a hat, and he's just like, hey guys, that's a nice generator. It'd be a shame if it was on fire. And then everyone turns him off in custom game settings. I need to add game analytics so I can check to see how many people actually turn off Greg. I am generally curious how many people statistically turn off Greg, so I can be like, wow, people really hate him. Like he is a bane of their. I think quite a few do, but I don't have that data. I need to get that data by adding like a game analytics plugin that will tell me like every time someone plays, it starts a session, and they're off, or the juggernauts are off, so I can figure out like, oh, people really hate them. We need to consider doing more changes to them to make them more fair, so we can balance it better. Anyhow, what were you saying?
I sometimes turn Greg on, off, on, off.
You've shattered me, sir.
uh, so yeah, but I think the last thing on my little list here that I've got is the birds.
Yes.
So when it comes to verticality with the birds, what are they going to be able to do when they do breach your backline? So, are they going to be able to spread infection? Are they going to be able to, like, really screw with you behind their lines, allowing your front to really open up to the infected, allowing a breach to happen?
Yes, that's the whole purpose of the birds. Is that they're kind of like a mass unit where they're supposed to be able to overwhelm your units like big swarms, unless you have like an Ajax with the anti-air add-on, or we add the Stinger one that's a stationary turret you can build that'll have a huge massive range for countering them. But the idea is that they're either like master units for like ground assaults that you're just massing out assaults. Let's bring some birds in. Um, you're hiding on an island. Let's send some birds in. Let's try and find a way to get in. Because the idea is that if they can find a way onto your island, they'll find a tree or they build it. They'll find a tree and or a building, and then they'll build a nest there. Then once that nest is built, they passively spread infection in that zone until the nest is destroyed, and that eventually will turn into infection pods being created, because then they'll start defending and entrenching themselves around those nests. So birds are basically like your bane of your existence if you're just turtling. They're hiding somewhere on the map.
Okay. Damn birds.
Yep.
So will they have when it comes to like continuing on with bird, when it comes to them being able to get into your back line, right? Could they hide? Right? Like say they make a nest in a tree, would they be able to hide in the tree to avoid detection from
They're,
say you've got scout drones?
oh yeah, their AI doesn't have any. Their AI does not have any understanding of how to stealth or hide. We haven't thought about that. It's been more of like if you don't see them, then they're the hidden enemy, where they basically just kind of sneak behind. So that's something that could come up, but maybe they have like a camouflage or a way to get past you, like visually, unless you're like right on top of them. Maybe the scout drone is the only unit that can see them and reveal them, kind of like the scout probe for the Protoss or the missile turrets. But I mean that's an idea because that would be making another way we get to like actually have like patrols of scout drones flying around. But I wouldn't really consider a change like that until we fix the patrolling for vehicles and for helicopters where they don't patrol till they run out of gas and then kill themselves. What most people don't realize is that like if you tell a helicopter to patrol, he will patrol until he runs out of gas and kills himself. It is great. It's horrible. So it's one of those things where like we need to go back in 1.3 and we need to make it to where you can designate a gas station, like a motor pool that they'll stop by on the way, or like an Atlas with gas add-on, so that way you could like have a way station where like, oh, I'm low, I need to do the calculation, determine I need this much gas to get to this circle, so I'm going to head to that circle and then resume my patrol route. Or if I'm a helicopter, I'm going to find the nearest helipad that is set to not evacuation mode. I'm going to land there, refuel, and then go back on my patrol route. Or if it's a motor pool, they'll do that. So that's generally one of the other quality of life changes that we're going to add in 1.3 is making it not so suicidal. Because they can be suicidal at times. It takes a while to kill them, but it's still annoying. Any other questions, Devar? Anything else you want to bring up?
No, that's finished up my list.
Okay. So, I mean, just to kind of like recap, um, I'm going to be putting out a build for people that came in late in the next couple of minutes. I have to just drink the rest of the coffee and slap it on my face. And then at that point, I'm just going to go through, cook a build, get it out to experimental. It will have more performance improvements. It'll have more perception improvements. And we're going to be pushing that line all weekend. More likely on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, until we're satisfied that there's no more dips. And then once those dips are resolved, people can enjoy the game. You can play on low to high spec computers, and the perception is accurate and working as intended. Then we'll go back to the writing, the automation, and ambient civilians in terms of, and then obviously the dynamic civilian groups as well. Sorry, there's some polish that needs to happen there before we officially move from 1.2. So that's generally the agenda that's going into there. And then we did release a free camo. We released 3 camos for those that are interested on the Steam store. For those that are like, it was like a snow one. Oh god, I don't remember all of them. It was like a desert one, and then there was a third one I can't remember. But those are on the Steam store. It's free camos from the DLC pool that we did, and then we made 2. Technically, we made 3 paid ones as support packs. People that want to basically like support development, give us a little bit more money. Like they're between like $2.99 and $3.99 for the two packs that are up right now. There'll be a third one coming out on Monday, which is like a Classic Wars pack where it has like the World War II paint job, and then has a Desert Storm paint job, and then it has another variation of the Woodland camo. So that'll be coming out on Monday. But if you're interested in supporting development further, it always helps us out if you want to pick up one of those support packs. I put it up on Steam, so then that way, like, it's a collect everything, so it's not FOMO, where you have to, like, if you don't buy it initially, you're screwed. So you could go back and you could get a discount. So if you bought them, like, if you bought one separately and then you go back and you buy it from the pack, you actually get more of a discount buying it in the bundle than buying them separately. Because then the bundle has like a discount regardless, even if you already have some of the items. So on Monday, when the other bundle comes out, the final bundle for the support pack comes out, if you buy it through there, you'll actually get more savings than buying the bundle separately. So just keep that in mind for those that want to save a little bit of money. Those are generally going to be discounted every month for roughly around 10%. So if you miss this time of buying it, consider buying it next time it's around. It does help development because we're trying to get more people on the team. We're trying to expand the team so we can speed up and get more things going. We're kind of working within our means. It's like some months slower, some months faster, and by getting a little bit more money in via these optional, like these 3 optional camo packs, they will allow us, if it's, if it helps out as much as we're hoping it helps out, to potentially bring on some more like specialists, some more contractors that work every couple of weeks. To basically like, or a couple of days to get like work. You're gonna go work on the Abrams. You're gonna work on the VTOL. That guy's helping out on San Francisco North. So then in turn, you guys get the content quicker. So yeah. But otherwise, regardless, we plan on finishing the game. Regardless, we plan on basically, like shipping everything we originally promised on the roadmap. It just takes a little bit longer sometimes. So we're very like, what's the word? Dynamic. Or robust in terms of like, okay, this didn't work out. We thought it'd take a little bit longer. We don't, like we have to kind of move people around here and there because we have like 5 developers on the team. So sometimes things can take, because like they like 1 or 2 of them they'll level design. There's only 2 programmers on the team, and then there's a character artist that puts them probably on weekends only. So it's like one of those things where it's just kind of like we just kind of work around based off of our day jobs. So that's why like some months it's like really, really crazy and a bunch of content, and other months a little bit slower. So just keep that in mind. It does help us quite a bit. I know that it's like an L in terms of basically just like, oh no, they're putting out DLC. And we're very receptive in terms of what people have been saying in terms of like they don't want us to like, we're in early access, we haven't finished the game yet. What the fuck are you doing? So we understand that there's a negative connotation applied with it, and we're doing our best to stay within the limitations of just those 3 skin packs, and then that's it. And then that's an optional thing. You want to get it, we give out the 3 free ones, and then if you decide to do it, it's great. It does help us. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. We'll figure it out. We've always had. We've been doing this for 3 years. We'll keep doing it until the game is done where it needs to be. It's just the reality of the situation is what we signed up for. So, I don't know, anything else there, Vaughn, you want to throw in there?
Uh, no, not that I can think of. We've gone through the little list that I've got here, so no, it's good. Yeah, it's up to you. What you want to do next?
Indeed. So you figure like we'll wind down from here because these are basically like we're gonna start doing these weekly, and the idea is that this one was kind of like a bunch of information just kind of thrown in. So next week we'll go over some level design stuff. We'll go over some animation stuff. We'll go over what the programmers are doing, and kind of keep you guys in the loop in terms of what's going on a weekly basis, so you guys can see what's going on. What issues are we running into? Um, in X, Y, and Z. We might sometimes have experimental builds tied into beta passwords tied into these, where it's like, hey, like, do you guys want to help us test something if you come on a Saturday? So there will sometimes be those where it's like, hey, like, who's interested in helping? We do a ping, and then we just kind of sometimes come back later in the day to kind of like check stuff, like the perception thing, where it's like we put that up, we're trying to gather more data, and then we're going to revisit that on Monday. Um, so that's a cool thing we'll be doing. And we'll be doing this every Saturday at 1 p.m. PST. So that way the European people can come, hopefully the Australians can come, and then the Americans can come because it's not too late. So we're going to try and keep it around roughly this time so we can try and accommodate as many people in different geographical locations as possible. And then this will also go up on YouTube as basically like a podcast thing. So if you want to go back and watch it, like X, Y, and Z, you'll be able to. It just takes a while for it to process. Um, Anything else so far, or you want to wrap it up?
One more thing to add to that is I would just like to let everyone know who asked questions. In the weekly recaps, we probably won't be answering a whole lot of questions unless Robert, you see one that's like you really want to answer.
Yeah,
Yeah, we won't really be answering any questions as it's not really an anime. It's just a casual old recap to let you all keep in the loop. So, yeah, make sure you save any questions that you have. Save those questions for the AMA that is coming at the end of the month.
last Sunday of every
Uh,
month.
yeah, Sunday of every month.
Sorry,
So,
last Saturday. I lied. Last Saturday. I lied.
Saturday.
Yeah, last Saturday.
Yeah. Whenever there's an AMA coming up, yep, that's when you can ask all your burning questions, and yeah, the developers will answer them.
Indeed. Okay, so I guess go ahead and give the outro, and we'll wrap up there so I can go work on this build.
Yep. Give me 1 second. I gotta yell at my dog. He's howling at the sirens.
Okay, I'll do the outro. You're fine. All right. Thank you guys for coming. We'll definitely be doing this again. Consider checking out our Patreon, checking out our support packs if you're interested in helping out. Um, and then we do send out postcards, so I'm going to be sending out postcards signed by the team for the reward tiers that are like at that amount or higher. So like anyone that's kind of like been pledging over 3 months, you're going to be getting that in the mail soon. With just like it's like a little postcard signed by the team, and it'll have just art from the game that we rotate out every quarter, roughly. So yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. We look forward to doing this again, and we hope to growing these to get more people in. I want to get more developers involved. Some of our developers are really shy, so they're just like, I don't know if I want to talk. So you figure if I can get more of them to come, that'd be great, so that they can talk about what they do, and they can answer more specific questions. That way, like if we have people on the channel that are more developers or more technically inclined, they can ask questions and be like, "Oh, how'd you guys solve this? And what are you guys doing for this?" Might find a solution. If someone knows something we don't know, you never know. The world's vast in terms of knowledge. So again, thank you guys, and you guys have a fun Saturday, and just hang tight until the next patch pushes out in the next couple minutes.